Welcome to Craft Chat Chronicles, the go-to podcast for tips on crafting best-selling fiction. Here at Craft Chat Chronicles, we bring you expert interviews, insights, and tips on writing, publishing, and marketing. Join the conversation and embark on a new chapter in your writing journey. For workshops, show notes, and more information, visit jdmyall.com. That's jdmyall.com.
On Season 2, Episode 10 of Craft Chat Chronicles, we are in for a real treat. On today's episode, we'll be talking to author Amy K Runyan, who's penned novels like A Memory of Lavender and Sage and A Bakery in Paris, which is out now. So in Season 2, Episode 10 of Craft Chat Chronicles, Amy K Runyan will give us lots of creative writing tips, and she'll dive into the MFA process for anyone who's interested in getting a Master of Fine Arts. For those of you who don't know, I'm co-chair of Drexel University in Philadelphia's MFA Alumni Association. And Amy K Runyan is part of the faculty and staff of Drexel University. So I'm really excited to get some writing tips from her today. So let's get chatty. That's Season 2, Episode 10 of Craft Chat Chronicles. Amy K Runyan is a historical fiction author. She's award-winning and widely acknowledged for her brilliance as a packet exchange professor and a writer. And today she's going to give us some tips on writing for your packet exchange. If you're in an MFA program like Drexel's low residency MFA program, these tips could help you get your packet together. And if you are not and you just want tips to improve your writing, please join us. There's a lot to learn.
All
hey,
right.
Hi. For starters, can you give me a little bit of an example of common mistakes you find in student writing?
Well, I think the most important thing is that you need to discuss your plan or your goals with your packet instructor. So that you know what so the packet instructor knows what the student is after, what their goals are for their career and for this project. And I think taking the time to have an early conversation before your first term starts is very important. I always like to have a good 15-minute chat with all my new students so that I know what the end goal is. Because if there are different people are after different things, whether they want a traditional publishing gig or to go into academics, etc. Those goals are going to look different. And I certainly have a lot more to offer the student who's after a traditional publishing gig, because that's where I live. And so that's my first piece of advice, is to really maintain an open forum of conversation with your packet instructor. And a good packet instructor should be willing to field emails all the time, even text messages if you get that comfortable. And, not being afraid to ask if something works, or to even throw somebody a paragraph and say, is this doing what it needs to do? And I think that that's really a good rapport to have. And I think that the counterpoint to that is knowing what you want out of the program and knowing what you want your piece to accomplish.
Okay, so when reviewing once you've had the conversation, what's your next step usually with the student?
I like to come up with a plan quarter by quarter. When are we gonna, are you gonna give me 60 pages up front, and we're gonna have one 2-hour mega Zoom? Or are we going to break it up? And I want you to have a specific timeline. One of the hardest parts about being a professional author is working to deadline, but it's just a reality of the business. And so you've got to learn to do that. And you need to learn to, set your expectations, and have a plan moving forward. That seems to be a common theme. It really is. But yeah, having a schedule and knowing what you want to do for each of those quarters. And if you can, if you look at the entire, if you've already got a piece and you're revising it, you can break up and say, I want to show you my book in the first 3 quarters, we're going to work together. And then in the fourth quarter, I'd like to, work on some revisions of the parts that weren't working. That's perfectly valid. But having that game plan, I think, really gives the program focus.
Mm-hmm. Love that. For your students who want to be professional writers and who want to go into traditional publishing, what are the strengths you most often see, and what are the areas you would suggest students work on improving?
Well, I think that the best tool in your arsenal or your toolbox is to have a unique premise. And that's easier said than done. And that's something that your packet instructor can't just provide for you. I mean, they could, that would be extremely generous, but chances are they're keeping their good stuff for themselves. But, I think that it's important to an understanding of the market and understanding what is selling. And of course, that's very tenuous because, in historical fiction, certain things go in waves. For the longest time, it was the Tudors, and you could write a book about Henry VIII's second cousin twice removed, and somebody'd be interested because everybody was obsessed with the Tudors, likely because of the HBO show. And then forever, it was World War II. You'll notice I jumped on that bandwagon. We all did. We all did. And that's fine. But those bubbles, ebb and flow. And some of them last longer than others. And so you can't chase the market too doggedly. And you want to be being an outlier is both risky, but it's also where the greatest reward was. If we look at one of the biggest books of 2023, or I guess it was late 24, might have been early 23, Lessons in Chemistry was a breakout book, and nobody had written anything quite like it, for ever. And it's definitely, you were seeing more and more books try to emulate that. I don't think that's necessarily the strongest position to be in, trying to emulate a big book, but all the same, like finding an interesting spin. For me, World War II, looking at the School for German Brides, nobody had written about the Nazi bride schools. It was a niche that nobody had written about. Yeah. Okay. So, it's really important to know what the market is going, to be aware of what's happening in the market, but not, you don't want to chase the trend too doggedly as, because you don't know what's going to happen. But, showing a potential agent or an editor that you're aware of what's being published and, actively reading a lot of what's happening in your genre is very important, because you'll be able to get a sense of where things might be headed. And of course, we have periods in historical fiction where it's kind of that weird gap where nobody knows what the next big thing is. And it's really kind of a hard time to try to write historical fiction. But it's also a time to throw weird stuff out there like, oh, you haven't seen a book set in 1840, I don't know, North Central Canada. I mean, and actually, that was how my debut happened. I wrote a book that was set in 1666 Canada, but it was in the period between, when the Tudors were in decline and before World War II had really taken off. And that, I found a publisher that was willing to give it a shot and say, let's see, maybe Canadian colonial will be the next big thing. Spoiler, it wasn't, but at least I got a debut, and that's a very fortunate thing.
Very true, very true. What do you see as being the topics that are coming in right now that seem to be popular in the ebb and flow today?
Topics that are popular, I think we're seeing in historical fiction, we're seeing a lot of later 20th century. Obviously, the big book so far this year is The Women by Kristen Hanna, which is Vietnam era. I'm not sure that everybody can pull that off. I mean, Kristen Hanna could publish a phone book and people would buy it. But, I think that like 1950s through the 1980s are going to have a moment. And we're also seeing things creeping earlier, which is exciting to a lot of historical fiction folks. Victorian era and even earlier in the 19th century are, there's getting some nibbles, and that's really exciting.
Hi, JD Mile here. Sorry to interrupt. I wanted to thank you for tuning in and to let you know that this episode of Craft Chat Chronicles has been brought to you by Heart's Gambit, my debut novel. It's available for pre-order right now at barnesandnoble.com. What is Heart's Gambit, you ask? It's about 2 time-traveling families, 1 cursed magical duel, and the pair of star-crossed lovers who might break the cycle if they don't break each other first. If you love the time travel romance of Outlander and the lush, haunting magic of the Night Circus, this is the book for you. Pre-order Heart's Gambit today at barnesandnobles.com and grab your copy when it hits shelves on February 3rd, 2026, wherever books are sold. Again, pre-order Heart's Gambit today at barnesandnoble.com and grab a copy when it hits store shelves on February 3rd, 2026. And while you're at it, don't forget to buy a copy of today's guest book and support their projects as well. Support authors, support bold stories. Now, back to Craft Chat Chronicles. Let's get chatty. Cool. Are there any commonalities you've noticed from the packets that you see as far as just in general, like things that kids today like really seem to be good at, or
yeah, I think that one of the problem bits I see in a lot of the pieces, especially historical pieces, but not always historical, is info dumping, where you've got this paragraph of really interesting information about, I don't know, about the pilgrims landing on Plymouth Rock or something like that, and it's fascinating. But you really need to be more deft about how you work it into the narrative, so it doesn't feel like all of a sudden you stopped and you're reading like Kincaid's Guide to American History, published in 1984, that we all read in high school, right? And we want to make it part of the narrative, make it advance the plot, and that's something like when you reread your stuff, and you should. Your packet exchange instructor should not be reading a first draft. They really shouldn't. Take the time to reread your stuff. If you can, and this is a big ask, have some other people from the program or other authors or other readers, or, I've got a lot of people who have had sensitivity readers for various things. Have some other people read it before you send it to your packet instructor, so that we can talk about, if it's like building up a house, you need to make sure that the foundation is solid, your framing is in great shape, so that we're talking about color samples and drapes, and and maybe a bit of wiring, but we don't want to be talking about the basic foundations of your story. We want to talk about how to make your prose smoother, and how to make the dialogue flow and that sort of thing. We don't want to be talking about the bare bones, like this entire chapter. I've never had that happen, thankfully, but this entire chapter is not advancing the plot. So you need to really, read back over your stuff and ask yourself, is X, Y, and Z advancing the plot? And that doesn't mean that you didn't need to write it. I have a chapter in the book I'm working on now that I'm really glad I wrote. It's like exposition about the main character's job and what she does. And it's super interesting, at least to me, but it's keeping the character from moving on into the main action of the story. And so it's going to get either condensed or cut all the way out. And that's fine. But it gives me some of her backstory that will make the rest of the story richer.
Love that.
So yeah.
What best advice do you have for students on the very first few pages when they're just getting started? How can they most impress you or intrigue the reader when they first open up their packet or their first chapter?
Okay, and this is one of the hardest things. Even I've written quite a few books, knowing where to start the story. I want to see that you've spent some time considering, is this the moment where we need to start the story? And I remember, the book that I'm in, it edits right now. I sent sample chapters to my editor or my agent a couple times, and she's like, you're not starting it in the right place. And I had it, it was a very quiet scene with an older sister looking after her siblings, waiting for their mom to pass away, which, there's some tension there, but it was far better to have, a contentious family meal after the funeral with a really nasty grandmother. And so you want to grab people's attention right away. And that's what makes prologues kind of a what's the word? It can make them a scary choice, or it can make them a very difficult, challenging choice, because you have to you have to set up the story. And if you're jumping to a scene that we don't have a lot of context for, even if it's really gripping and fun, we don't care about the characters yet, because the single most important thing, and this is sweeping advice for everybody who picks up pen and paper or starts typing, the most important thing you have to do is to make your reader care about the character. Everything else, every single other thing is gravy. You can write the most basic kind of monosyllabic prose. And well, people will be annoyed by that, to be sure. But if you make them care about your characters, they may keep reading. And that's the trick to keeping people reading. Because it's not just about getting people to take an interest in your book and to click on your book and maybe buy your book. And then you don't want them to leave it on a shelf or just open it up and do not finish, or on their Kindle, what have you. You want them to finish the book and to review the book and to become fans and talk about your book, to proselytize about your books. That's the end goal.
Now, what advice do you have for making people care about the characters?
I think making your characters, complex and interesting, putting some thought into the challenges they're going to face, because the difference, a comedy, and we're talking in like the original kind of Greek origins of the term. A comedy is where you have a hero facing challenges that their unique set of flaws will make difficult, but they will ultimately overcome it. A tragedy is where the hero's flaws are such that it makes it incompatible with any sort of victory. So if you think about the difference between, let's say, Much Ado About Nothing and Othello, we see that those characters, ultimately, we have one who is able to hear reason and to believe that his partner was not unfaithful, whereas the other wasn't. Those stories really are opposite sides of the same coin. We have a husband who believes he's been cheated on, or a fiance in that case, who believes he's been cheated on, but he ultimately listens to reason and believes that his bride didn't cheat on him, and they get to have their happy ever after. For Othello, the opposite is true. He believes the rumors, and Desdemona pays the price for it. And so either of those endings are valid. I'm going to say that the Much Ado About Nothing ending is going to be the one that's probably more appealing to American markets. Hard to, tough to say, but not like it all has to be buttoned up and beautiful, but ending on an optimistic note. But either of those are valid, but you want to have characters. You thought about what makes them tick, whether you're looking at the Enneagram and thinking about their different personality types, or the Jungian archetypes, or what have you, or whether you're just riffing off the cuff. Think about what are the situations in which your character will excel and do well, and then the things that are going to really be their roadblock, their hindrance, and how do they react under stress? Because you need to be putting your characters under stress, or we don't have much of a story.
Very true, very true. I found in my packet exchanges that like different packet exchange teachers gave me different things. For example, I thought developmental stuff, and Heather Christie was really, really good with detail. Like she would point out little setting things that I could, make a little better that I never saw, and I was like, "Ooh, yay, love that." You know what I mean? But they both elevated my writing and helped me become better. What do you think are your strong suits? What do you think that is, if you had to pick? I know you have many skill sets, but if you had to pick, what do you think that your thing is most?
I think I'm pretty good at weeding out the things that are bogging down the pacing, because pacing, we've got an impatient society. I hate to say it, but we've got people have less time. This is not like the 1880s. I've got these classic books above me, Les Miserables right there. Nobody back then. Victor Hugo had, and he also, I believe, published that one in serial. But people had, even farmers and things like that who might have read novels in the winter when the crops were fallow or whatever. They had longer bouts of time with very little else to do, and so they'd read by the fire at night or what have you. But nowadays we have so much competition for our leisure time, and people are spending a lot of time in the office, and we have jobs that are mentally taxing. And so a lot of people, I mean, you got to find or keep the pacing going, or people are going to end up scrolling on their phones. It's just,
Very
or
true.
watching Netflix or what have you, because people are tired at the end of the day. They want something, a story that is going to propel them. And that's not to say that they don't want an immersive story that they can swim in a little bit, but you really have to make sure that the pacing holds up. And that's one thing I'm kind of ruthless about. Like, this paragraph is not serving you, it's weighting it down, because that's the thing that I always, try to, especially now that I mean, it's a little bit easier in historical fiction because there's so many active things. If you're writing, World War II or even post World War II, or, the Franco-Prussian War, there, things were getting slow, toss in an explosion, everything's great. But, I've transitioned. I also write contemporary women's fiction, and you can't do that in 2023 Provence. Just having a well-timed explosion doesn't make sense. So you have to find ways to keep the pacing going. And a paragraph about the history of Occitan language or something isn't going to be the most exciting thing. And you've got to relate, all those fun details back to character, again, because it makes people care more about the character and it propels the story. So that's what I really kind of ruthlessly try to look for in my students' packets, are the ways to make the pacing tighter.
Love that. And that's something they're going to need to get published, because most agents, if it slows down, if they find it slow, they're going to put it down. They're going to be bored and move on to the next.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a society where there's a lot of competition for our entertainment time, which is actually less than it used to be in times past. I mean, people either had zero or a lot, it seems. If we're looking 19th century, where have you. But some of that pacing stuff, it's amazing how just looking at your dialogue tags, or just looking at things at the line or the paragraph level, can you cut a few words out of that sentence and it tightens everything down so it feels like it flows faster? And that's important.
Very true, very true. So overall, story and packet advice that you think would help, as far as in the packet exchange and in the whole novel writing process, I guess, as making sure the end of the sag and making your endings good. What are some tips you can toss out?
Yeah, I think that, making sure that you've got, I think it would personally be ideal to come into the program with a book written, but not everybody does. A lot of my students have, and that's great because we can workshop the heck out of it, and we're not dealing with first draft stuff. This is a great position to be in. But if you aren't, have a solid outline and know where you're going. And that doesn't mean there isn't room for organic discovery, and that's one of the things where, I've had characters like pop up out of nowhere, when I've got a tightly outlined book and I know what all the the banner events are, the structure given to us by the actual historical events. But all of a sudden this character pops up in a classroom and she becomes somebody that should have probably had a POV, been a POV character in a book. And that's fun. It's a great deal of fun because above all, you should be enjoying what you're doing. Maybe not every minute of it, but it should be on the whole fun. But just know what you're doing. The MFA program is a very short period of time. Go in there with a battle plan and know what you want to do, know what you want to accomplish, and don't shortchange yourself by rushing to meet deadlines, et cetera, and so forth. Put yourself in a position where you've got time to revise and think things over before you submit to your packet instructor, so that they're working with your work as the work that is as good as you can make it on your own. It doesn't mean it have to be flawless. It doesn't have to be flawless. I don't want to intimidate people like that, but it needs to be the best work, more or less, than that you can make without the help of an editor. And then the editor or your packet exchange instructor or your agent should help you take it to the next level. And I've always said that a good editorial letter is like a free MFA course. And so you really want people to be working with people who aren't afraid to tell you when things aren't working. Develop a thick skin, because those comments, I mean, of course, there are malicious people out there, but by and large, everybody at Drexel is, everybody wants to see you succeed. Certainly your editors and agents should be there too, down the road. But you really want to develop a thick skin so that you can absorb all those comments, because chances are they're designed to, and not saying every single one of them is valid, but the end goal is trying to make your work better. So you should at least consider everything that's being said, even if you don't incorporate all of it.
Very true, very true. For those who are watching that are not in Drexel, encourage them to come to the program. Let them know what makes our program special and why they should be dragons.
Well, first of all, I love Drexel. I love the program at Drexel. I am a dragon for life. And what I think is great is that they take people who are serious about their craft and serious about teaching students how to be the best writer they can be, but they pair it with a lot of business savvy, so that we're not shoving students out into the publishing world without an idea of how to swim in a very, very large, very confusing ocean run by English majors. And the publishing world is hard. It's hard, and breaking in is extremely hard. And the fact that you graduate from Drexel having met real agents, real editors, been to New York during the residency to be in the room where it happens is, I think it's an invaluable experience that doesn't happen in a lot of other MFA programs that are designed to help make people write beautiful academic short stories, but aren't designed to help people become commercial novelists. And really, it's almost easier to get a publishing gig and to become a published novelist than it is to find a full-time academic job. That's just the reality of it. Because a lot of people say, well, I want to be a writer, but I can get a job teaching creative writing at the university level and have time to write. And yeah, it's great when that works out, but there are so many people who want to be in that job. It's extremely competitive. So, just focusing on being successful in the industry and knowing how the industry works is invaluable. And so I recommend the program wholeheartedly.
Me too, because when you graduate, it doesn't end. The
it's
graduate,
true.
the alumni MFA, we keep doing craft chats and things like this. So you're still connecting, you're still part of the family, and you're still trying to inform others. So it's a great program. You should definitely
It is, and yeah, it really is a great program. And I know that the most of us packet instructors, if you want to reach out and say, hey, Amy, I've tweaked my query letter. Would you mind looking at it before I send it out? Or can you help me look over this passage before I query, or that sort of thing? Most of us will be happy to do it. We want to see you succeed. We want to hear about all your good news, because we feel like we got to help a little, and that's exciting for us because we care about you. And that's the great thing about the writing community in general. I expected it when I started writing to be cutthroat and competitive, and it is competitive, but as the saying goes, a rising tide lifts all boats. And so the success of your friends and colleagues can equate to success for you too, because book sales beget book sales. And so there's room for everybody at the table. And I've just used 87 cliches in the same sentence, and that's fine. But it's the truth. It's the truth. It really is a community. And the fact that the most successful writers that I know are the most, generous and open and caring people, is for a darn good reason, because they engender support from their peers. And they say, you know what? That person it was so kind. They shared my cover. They're always rooting me on and that sort of thing. I'm going to do the same for them. And that's how it works. And it's not transactional. It's breeding good karma.
Very true.
Yeah.
What tools do you think, because you mentioned earlier when you were saying that they should have it as polished as possible before they present it to you. So are there any tools or resources you would suggest, like maybe, is there any editors that you would point out, or like any places where they could meet beta readers or something like that if they don't have a relationship?
I mean, goodness, at this point, do not hire a professional editor because I mean,
Okay.
invest your money in the MFA because you
Hmm.
should come out of it with a fairly clean document. But
Hmm.
beta readers are invaluable, and I think that every region has various writer groups. Like for here, I'm in Colorado, and in our region we have Rocky Mountain fiction writers, and
Hmm.
it's a great place. The conference is once a year, and I would not be where I am if I hadn't invested the money to go to spend time at the RMFW conference and to make contacts. And I remember my first time going to the RMFW conference. I went to a panel on the care and feeding of online critique groups, which are
Hmm.
online critique groups are so handy in this day and age because picking up, getting up and commuting to some library room or something to meet with 6 or 7 other people, it can be hard, but everybody can Zoom. And anyway, I had a young woman come sit next to me, hand me a business card, and say, "We're in a critique group now. We're friends. Deal with it." And we've been friends for 10 years now, and 11 years. Oh my goodness. And, she published 2 novels that did very well. I've published a whole slew. And our critique group is no longer really, but, it was a place where a lot of us kind of found our traction or didn't. So a critique group is a wonderful thing to have. People who are at your stage. I mean, it's good to have a range, like people who are aspiring, people who are getting into the market, and people who are, somewhat established in the market, to find a good mix so that everybody can help everybody out. Because even the people who are established will benefit from the eyes of people who aren't already like kind of jaded a bit by the industry.
Hmm.
And because we do become a bit jaded. It's a hard business, and it's okay, it's worth it. But having that mix of ability levels is really handy. But a lot of almost every region of the country is going to have various organization, and you can look by genre. My group was definitely multi-genre, but if you want to have a romance critique group, or a historical fiction or a mystery critique group, that's great too. But then you can basically reach out to those organizations wherever you are, and they often have like a matchmaking system to put people in critique groups or to find critique partners, because it's something that every kind of debut writer needs.
Very good, very good. Is there any other packet advice that we have or that we didn't cover that you can think of?
I think that's a lot of it, but just keep an open communication with your packet instructor. Know what you want to do, know what you want to accomplish, and just really invest as much as you can of yourself in the program. And the more you invest, the more you'll get back. Read tons. I mean, you read the market, and you cannot chase the market because by the time you have a great idea, it's already going to be like passe. So you can't ride waves, but you can look at historical trends by looking at what's being published as Historical Novel Review. The publication of the Historical Novel Society has reviews of, and it's a volunteer organization, believe it or not, and it is kind of the beginning and end word as far as historical fiction and what's being published. Of course, you can look at Publishers Marketplace and see what's being sold, but you don't look at what's just being sold right now. Look at the historical record of about 5 years to see what trends are emerging, and see if you can find something that falls within that niche. Now, you may want to write a 17th century book set in New Orleans with all this cool stuff, and if it's a hard sell, it's that's going to be a hard thing to overcome. So, but look at what's it's not saying that it's impossible. And I have a friend who has been trying to write a book set in a hard time period, with some things that kind of flaunt convention, like a male protagonist. That is not all that common in historical fiction, unless you're Margaret George, who wrote Nero. And she got an agent right before Christmas, and her book is going to be discussed in a editorial meeting in the next few weeks. So miracles do happen, but it took her years to finally get somebody to listen to that idea. So yeah, so that's key, is look at read and read widely about of the books that are coming out. Know what the style is like, know what the conventions are. You cannot learn how to write effective historical fiction that is going to be saleable by reading books that are 20 years old. Knowing the market, I think, is really important for whatever genre you're in.
Delving into the publishing world, what were some of the biggest lessons or surprises you encountered once you became a published novelist?
Well, I think we all think that once I get an agent, everything is going to be grand. Once I get a book deal, everything is going to be great. And the thing is, success is not linear. I had published 2 books. I got a 2-book contract with my first publisher. And before the first book was even out, they told me that they were not going to publish a third, even though I was ready to. The second manuscript was being edited. And it should have been the time, like once your second manuscript was accepted, is the time when you're usually at liberty to pitch another book, right? And if you're lucky enough to have a 2-book contract, otherwise with your 1-book contract, as soon as the your first round of edits have been accepted, you're free to pitch the next book. And they told me before Promise to the Crown had even come out that they were not going to accept my pitches, not because they didn't like them, but because the pre-orders and the interest in Promise to the Crown was not enough to justify more books. Mm-hmm. And that was a tough pill to swallow before I was even a published author, before the books had even come out. And so I had to go through the agony of editing a book that I knew would get no publisher support whatsoever. And it was hard. It was really hard. And I there was a rough period in there, but I sat down with my agent, and the key in this business is getting knocked down 10 times and standing up 11. And boy, howdy, it is so true. The people who I know who have been in this business for 10 years or more, it's all people who have had disaster stories and come back swinging. And there are plenty of people who just said, I've published 6, 7 books. This is a rat race and I'm done. And that's fine too. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that too. But anyway, so I sat down with my agent over the phone, and I read her aloud, because I have an idea file, and there's literally 1-sentence pitches. And one of them was Russian female fighter pilots in World War II. That's a nice segue out of colonial Canada, isn't it? She said, yes, write that one. That's your money pitch, kid. And so I pitched it, and I started writing. I was about half a manuscript in, because I had to write the whole manuscript to go back on sub. Now, if you're already at a house, the rule of thumb is that you can often get away with just writing like a proposal, and it depends on the house. Like Harper Muse, they bought this book on a page proposal. At William Morrow, it's more like a solid proposal of 3 to 7 pages and 3 chapters. But then if you're going on submission, depending on how established you are, back then I needed the entire manuscript, and it had to be pitch perfect. Now I might be able to go away with 100 pages, so like a quarter of a book, maybe, if I'm lucky, and a really polished synopsis. But I'm a bit of a known quantity. I'm not a big name, but I'm known a little bit. Yeah, I've seen her on a couple of BookBub lists. She's gotten like 1 or 2 trade reviews. Yeah, we kind of know her. And so not entirely a nobody, but like one step away. And so anyway, I was halfway through working on Daughters of the Night Sky, and I didn't think that I was going to have a shot to get into Big 5 after having 2 books that didn't do well at Kensington, which was the largest of the independent presses. And so I had my eye on Lake Union. And a funny story was that Kate Quinn posted on Facebook, I stayed up way too late last night researching the Russian female fighter pilots from World War II. And I freaked out because I'm halfway done with this manuscript. There's a cloud of expletives hanging over Black Forest, Colorado to this day. And my now ex-husband comes in and says, what is wrong? Kate Quinn is writing my book. It was going to be my big break. And I am never going to be a published author again. This is terrible. So in a moment of utter lack of professionalism, I text her and say, Kate, you can't do this to me. I am halfway done. And she's like, oh, I've had this happen. C.W. Gortner was writing a book about the Borgias at the same time I was. It'll be fine. And she said it was like 1 out of 3 timelines for her. And a lot of her book was post-war. And so there wasn't a lot of Night Witch material, and mine was like straight Night Witches, the story of the Night Witches. But because of that post on Facebook, I got connected with Lake Union through Libby Hawker, funny thing, make lots of writer friends.
Mm-hmm.
And her editor had asked her just the previous week, could you please write a book about the Night Witches? And she said, no, thanks, because it wasn't her bailiwick. And p.m. on a Friday, we're pitching this to Lake Union on half a manuscript next week. She rolled her eyes and said, fine. And we had a book deal in 4 weeks.
Yay.
Yeah. So yeah, that was the story of, but that was my most successful book to date.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you to Lake Union for that one. And it was because I was willing to pivot. I had to pivot. So, I mean, the ability, like you may say, I want to write, 17th century fiction for my entire career. You want to be like, Philippa Gregory writes true to fiction exclusively. Pam Jenoff writes World War II stories exclusively. And if you can make it, great. But if you don't, or if you stumble, the ability and the willingness to be resilient and to pivot in a new direction is, it's inherent to that is invaluable to survival in this industry.
Very good. Do you guys have any questions for Amy?
Thank you. I just wanted to know, how do you usually start your research process? Where do you jump off?
Usually I try to find a really good secondary source. Like for A Bakery in Paris, there's a wonderful book about the Paris Commune called Massacre by John Merriman. A book recommended by my husband. Actually, my husband was the one that suggested when we were first dating, because I was looking for new ideas, and he said, write about the Paris Commune. And I refreshed my memory. I'm like, dang, Jeremy's right. And we found out about the book deal on our honeymoon. It was meant to be. Anyway, so I start off there, and then I data mine. I read it for a good, kind of orientation. It's kind of like the in-depth Wikipedia article for, the topic, and get oriented in what's going on, the key elements, the key historical details, and then I data mine the bibliography for the primary sources to really get the flavor of what was going on, and then move on from there. Often make a trip to CU Boulder and come back with like my body weight in books, and really dive in. But then for something like Mademoiselle Eiffel, where there are no books, like no secondary books about Claire Eiffel, there are a healthy number of books about Gustave Eiffel. Fewer than you would think, believe it or not, despite the fact that he has created the single most recognizable man-made monument in the world. And I don't think that's questionable. I think it is without question. I mean, you see that in space where it is. So I had to craft together what I could, beginning off with about her through the guise of her father's story. And I mean, if you look at any biography of Gustave Eiffel, Claire is mentioned because she is so integral into his life. But you had to kind of piece together a timeline based on where he was. So the trick for that one was going to Paris twice and getting permission to access the family archives at the Musée d'Orsay and getting your hands on her own correspondence. And of course, the time period that is most integral, from the time when her mother dies through the building of the Eiffel Tower, and then the Panama Canal scandal afterwards, there's actually not a lot of correspondence from Claire because she's with her father and husband almost the entire time. So you have to, is really weaving a story from what you don't know, through the gaps in the things that you do know. And so it was a real challenge, but given that my editor just got it back to me on December 15th with all caps, I love this book. You made me cry way more than I expected to. I'm calling it a win. But it was a real challenge from a research perspective, whereas the Paris Commune, because I was not dealing with real historical figures for the most part, a few cameos from real people. But I had the liberty to put people where I wanted them and to create, but you're dealing with the framework of the political climate. But then like Girls on the Line, I had an embarrassment of riches as far as firsthand accounts from the women who were involved as telephone operators in World War I. And it was a fairly easy trip to Missouri to get all that. Kansas City, Missouri. And I got to meet by random run of happenstance, the lawyer who in 1979, the year I was born, folks, the lawyer who won the case for the Hello Girls, to be recognized as actual veterans of the United States Army because they were subject to court martial and all the same rules. But when they came home, they were told, "Oh, you can't go to VA hospitals, and you're not going to get a pension." No, what were you thinking? Because they could not, because the Army Code of Conduct said man, whereas like the Navy one, the Yale Minets got full benefits because it said person, not man. The Army one says man, specifically men. And so the women had to take them to court, and it was not until there were only 20 of them surviving out of 200 plus operators that they won the case. But I got to meet the lawyer. I was trying not to sob in his presence because like, you're amazing. But that was, the universe came to me on that book, and that was really special. But I think that starting with local resources and online resources and doing what you can to put things, research trips, because they're expensive. They're great fun, but they're expensive. And so planning, when I went to Paris this past April, I had practically a minute by minute idea of where I was going to be and what I was going to do. Tuesday's Eiffel Tower. Day 1 and day 3 and 5 are going to be spent in the archives, and then a list of things I wanted to photograph for social media content, and because I had 5 full days in Paris and a list of all the restaurants where I wanted to eat. And it was a very serious undertaking to plan that trip, but it was a delight. But having that footwork done before I got to Paris, I felt like I utilized every second effectively.
Nicolette, your question?
Yeah. So how do you kind of balance out the research and the writing? Like, do you do all of your research ahead of time and you're like, or do you start writing because you have the idea and you're like, oh man, I'm already ready to start writing, but then you just kind of read as you go, or like kind of, because I'm kind of struggling with that. I'm writing a historical fantasy novel, and it's like, I am now writing my other manuscript, second draft, so that I can take time to read for the other one that I've already written a couple drafts for, because I'm just like,
that's a strong strategy.
Yeah. I can't do it at the same time.
Yeah, I know that there are people who like spend a year reading before and these are like the big dogs that are writing like doorstopper length books that like spend a year reading before they start writing. I am not that patient. And I guess maybe not that devoted to I'm not a historian. My husband's a historian. I pointed to his bookshelf, sorry, because we turned the basement of our house into a library, so you can tell we're a bookish nerd. We're a very well suited couple. Anyway, but I will start with that secondary source like Massacre for a bakery in Paris. And that's usually enough to get started. One really good secondary source, and then getting my hands on some of the primary sources. Like the big primary source that I read for Girls on the Line was Grace Branker's diary, and I had to write her great-granddaughter for a copy, and she mailed it to me free of charge. Like she's like, "Here you go, kid." Like, I mean, not the original, but she sent me a photocopy, and like I scanned the whole thing, and then that was an amazing gift. And always remember to thank those people. And the thing is, like, that's one trick for research, is that there are experts in your field or on your topic who would give anything to have somebody willing to listen to them for a day. Like, oh my God, they're really to just like information bomb you. Mm-hmm. Take advantage of those people, thank them, give them gifts. That is important. And thank them in the back of your book. So I try not to get too bogged down in the research. Really feels thin, it's not working. That might be the time to stop and research. Stop and read a good book about the topic. And like for me, that with the Panama Canal scandal, man, that was a tough section to write. Because I wasn't all that excited to write it. And so finding the pertinent information really helped, because I have to orient the reader into what's happening historically. So taking the time to stop, even if you lose your word count for the day, and to read more, to read up on a specific topic really helps. So I will leave gap notes like, research this fact, and come back and do it later. But if it's something where it will cause a real problem, then I will stop and research it right then and there. I try not to lose momentum. The distraction-free writing craze is there for a reason. And of course, dealing with stuff that far back in history, you can get, the legalities. People aren't going to necessarily know that. They're going to attack you for using like a wooden hairbrush or an ivory hairbrush instead of a wooden one or silver one or what have you. But they're not going to know the intricacies of Canadian law in 1666. So, you can feel free, to remind your readers that this is a work of fiction.
Awesome. Any parting advice you want to offer everybody?
Read a lot, write a lot, enjoy the process. It's, yes, will it be a slog? I'm not going to tell you every minute is just, a bundle of joy and just rapture all the time. But enjoy the process and celebrate your wins. Most of the people in this business are kind and want other people to succeed. A rising tide lifts all boats, and add in whatever cliche you prefer. But, it's tough, and you got to thicken your armor. You got to wear your armor, thicken your skin. But when you have victories, and there will be victories, celebrate them, even if they seem small.
Love that.
Yeah.
How can everybody connect with you?
I have a website, www.amykrunyan.com, and you can find me on Facebook and Threads. And Threads is a lovely community, by the way, for the writing community. It's kind of there's a lot of bookish people on it. It's kind of like a slightly nicer version of Twitter. Though I think there are dark corners of that too. Instagram, I'm on Instagram as Bookish Amy, and TikTok even sometimes if you want to watch my baking videos. So I'm trying to have a social media presence. So whatever your social media platform of choice is, I'm probably there. So.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. We appreciate you. We got lots of knowledge and information, and thanks again.
Lovely to be here. If you think of any questions after the fact, please reach out. I'm happy to help.
Awesome. Will do. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Everybody. Thank you so much.
That wraps up today's Craft Chat Chronicles with JD Mayo. Thanks for joining us. If you liked the episode, please comment, subscribe, and share. For show notes, writing workshops, and tips, head to jdmayo.com. That's jdmayo.com. While you're there, join JD's mailing list for updates, giveaways, and more.
Are you struggling to keep your writing organized? Trust me, I've been there. I want to introduce you to Scrivener, the ultimate program for all writers. You can outline, draft, and even edit all in one place. Whether it's your next novel, screenplay, or even thesis, Scrivener helps you stay focused and finish strong. Scrivener adapts to your workflow. From your first draft to the final edit, it's a writer's secret weapon. Click on the link below and get started on your Scrivener writing journey today.